My game is doing that thing where the Sims just stack up actions and then just don't seem to do anything on screen. The animations don't play out. It's showing that Carol's actually asleep, even though she's awake there, and now Elgers has just come and sat on top of Ailish. And they've just kind of merged into each other. Elgers is the only one who's actively acting out whatever it is that he's doing. And switching through the other Sims doesn't seem to be fixing it. It's so weird when it does this. Because there we have Glenn sleeping out in the river. But there's been a few instances of strange things like this happening, and I think it might just be the curse of the asylum. Hi there, welcome to my channel and welcome to part 4 of my Asylum challenge. Last week we started out with Ailish's story and they started making progress on their aspiration, which is the neighbourhood confidant aspiration. Just a quick reminder that for this challenge I can only control one sim at a time until they've completed their aspiration, and again at the moment we're telling Ailish's story. Once Ailish has completed their aspiration they will leave the asylum and I will move on to the next sim in line. So with that being said, let's continue Ailish's story. Ailish was trying hard to make friends in the asylum. It wasn't easy when some of the characters in the asylum included people like Stuart, who went around being kind of weird most of the time, but Ailish was trying their best. They were starting to feel sad because Stuart was bringing them down more than anything, to be honest. But they were persevering and started trying to tell Stuart one of their famous, hilarious stories. They put their everything into it, all their effort to make the story as interesting as possible. And Stuart responded by getting up and going to take a poop. Feeling dejected, but determined not to give up, because Ailish was determined to leave the asylum, they headed off to have their breakfast. Sometimes Ailish felt like their best friend in the asylum was the robot, which they trained with and sparred with. The robot was always positive and interacted with Ailish in a reasonable and sensible manner, and in many ways, Ailish felt like the robot might actually be the best person in the asylum. Unfortunately, the robot did not count as one of the Sims that Ailish would need to befriend in order to complete that part of their aspiration. For one part of their aspiration, they needed to make 5 good friends in the asylum, and so far, they'd only managed to make 1. Ailish decided to give it another try befriending Andy. They had made a little bit of progress building a relationship with Andy, but it was hard because, as usual, Andy was just absolutely miserable. Sitting at the chess table, something he should enjoy, playing chess, being the sort of nerd brain character that he is, but still, he was sitting there feeling sad. After some time chatting to Andy, and really not very much time chatting to Andy, he suddenly got up and ran off to the toilet to go and take a poop. Ailish was pretty sure it wasn't their fault that every time they tried to have a conversation with someone, the person would run off dramatically to take a poop. But it was starting to become something of an unusual trend. As some of the Sims were gathered at the dining table, Ailish joined them, and there they had the choice of Glenn, who is a complete prick, Elgers, who, well, let's not even go there, or Michelle. And so Ailish chose the lesser of 3 evils and tried to befriend Michelle. Michelle was kind of disgusting and annoying, but she could be reasonable sometimes, and perhaps she was a better option to become one of Ailish's good friends. When Ailish went to the kitchen to get something to eat, they found Susan in there. Ailish was looking to make some friends in the asylum, and it was important that they interacted with as many Sims as they could. So after eating their meal in silence, they decided to go directly to bed. Ailish returned their attention to Cringy Carol. Cringy Carol seemed like someone who was easy to befriend. Maybe not necessarily someone that you'd really want to befriend, but certainly someone who was easy to befriend. Ailish patiently listened to all of Carol's cringy nonsense, her stories about her experiences on Cupid's Corner, and all her terrible jokes that were just really another way to give herself a compliment. You know, those sort of jokes where someone acts like they're telling you a funny story, but they're actually backing you up into a corner so that you have to say something positive about them. That's the sort of thing that Ailish had to endure as they tried to befriend Carol. All the attempting to befriend people like Carol had actually given Ailish something of a boost to their charisma skill. So much so, in fact, that just a little bit of time spent in front of the mirror, further practicing their charisma skill, shortly brought it up to level 4. Taking them one step closer to achieving that part of their aspiration, which would require them to get their charisma up to level 7. Raising their charisma had proven to be one of the easier parts of achieving their aspiration, because it took every ounce of charisma that Ailish had in order to endure trying to befriend some of these individuals in the asylum. Harvestfest arrived on the inhabitants of the asylum, and Ailish decided to celebrate Harvestfest the best way they knew how, by interacting with the gnomes.
Oh, bust him. Oh, bust. Oh, bust him. Oh, bust him.
After successfully interacting with all the gnomes that had appeared in the asylum, Ailish returned their attention to befriending Michelle. Michelle was tense, but the tension quickly eased off, which was definitely better than being sad or angry or uncomfortable, which is the mood that everyone else in the asylum seemed to almost constantly be in. After some amount of time of chatting, Ailish found that not only was their friendship with Michelle growing, but also their charisma skill was increasing. This was a double win in helping them achieve their aspiration and taking them one step closer to getting out of the asylum. Ailish found themselves feeling a little angry. Being hot-headed, it wasn't uncommon for them to often feel just irrationally angry for no particular reason, so much so that they were finding it difficult cooking. They had decided they might attempt to make a grand meal since it was Harvestfest, but perhaps it was the thought that no one in the asylum would appreciate their efforts, or perhaps it was just that all they had to cook with was just a bunch of eggs. And so, in an expression of their anger and frustration, they proceeded to just add an absolutely unreasonable amount of pepper to their cooking. More and more and more. And hopefully that might be enough to poison someone. Hopefully Susan.
Pusep?
Feeling a little sad by the time they were finished, Ailish finally just decided to call everyone to the meal and hope for the best. Maybe it wouldn't be quite as bad as they were dreading it might be. As everyone finally sat down to eat their meal, the mood was actually reasonably pleasant. There were only 7 Sims at the table, but that's because Andy wasn't there. He was probably off being miserable or pretending to be so busy that he couldn't spare the time to eat, despite the fact that no doubt he would be found later on eating one of those extra stinky pot noodles at his desk. And so, as our members of the asylum sit around the table together in what is the closest they will probably come to a moment of harmony, we will end today's episode here. Tune in next time as Ailish continues to try to befriend some of these odd characters at the asylum, continues to try to grow their charisma, and to offer advice successfully to the Sims of the asylum. Thanks for watching. Carol has hurt Andy's feelings, probably with one of her horrible remarks that she makes. But there he goes applauding it with a happy face, because that's the sort of character that Andy is. Too cringy, even for cringy Carol.